What's up guys, I got a brand new video for you today. Welcome to 2022. I got the A7IV here. I just pulled it straight out of the box. I have not even turned it on yet. Dropped a battery into it, plugged it in, and I'm gonna set it up for you guys. Basically, this is how I set up all my Sony cameras. There's gonna be a few differences because this camera has a few options that some of my other cameras don't have. I got a camera recording over my shoulder. I'm recording the screen down here, and typical Sonys, if you wanna record the information out, you can't see the back of the screen, so it's recording to off camera. So if you're wondering why there's nothing on the screen, that's why. Now obviously this is just my personal preference on how I set things up. I also tried to put a screen protector on it, the same one that I would use on the A7S III, and it doesn't fit this screen. And when you put them side by side, they look exactly the same, but the screen protector is actually a little bit too long and kind of short. So like the screen is a little bit different dimensions. I don't know why. I'll have to figure out where to get a screen protector for this, but when I do, I'll put it linked in the description. So let's set this bad boy up. So obviously when you first turn it on, it's gonna ask you what language you want to set it as. And we gotta set our date and time. It's gonna choose New York. And it's January 1st. And we'll register later. Boom, that's it. Now the first thing I'm gonna do is go into the menu here, and we are gonna go all the way down to the yellow toolbox. And I'm gonna go down to power setting and turn auto power temp off to high. This is the first thing I do on all my Sony cameras. If you don't do that, the camera will probably shut off from overheating within like 15 minutes. So I've done this to all my Sony cameras. It does kind of give you a warning. I haven't had a problem. I've been running tons of Sony cameras this way. So auto power temp high, set that on first. Otherwise your camera's gonna overheat and shut off. Next thing I'm gonna do is actually turn my display brightness to sunny weather. I always turn it to the highest brightness because when you're outside, you need it to be bright. There's also one cool option on this camera. If you go down to the setup option 13 and go over, we've got the anti-dust function. And what happens is when you turn that to on, it'll actually close the shutter down when you take the lens off, and that way dust can't get in, so I'm gonna keep that on. But there is a warning in this mode. First, the shutter blades are really delicate and sensitive. You can't touch them or you could damage them. And another thing is if you left your lens on with the lens cap off in the sun, it could actually turn into a magnifying glass and burn a hole through the shutter blade. So that's something you might not wanna do. I may leave this off, I'm not sure yet, but it's nice to have the option because these sensors collect dust like crazy. So let's start from the beginning here. The cool thing with this camera is you can actually have independent settings, photo and video independent from each other, and I'll show you how to do that in a bit. But let's jump right into photos first. JPEG quality, we're gonna go down to image quality settings, and we're going to do JPEG plus RAW, and we're gonna do RAW uncompressed. The cool thing is you do have the option to do lossless compressed, and it just gives you a little bit smaller file size, but we're just gonna do uncompressed for now. JPEG quality, extra fine. JPEG image size, you can do 14 megapixels or 8.2 megapixels. We're gonna leave this at 32 megapixels and hit OK. Aspect ratio, we're gonna do 3:2. Cool thing is you can also do 1:1, so you can do squares for like Instagram or whatever. And the video file format, I'm not gonna tackle this yet. I'll talk about this in a bit, so I'm gonna go back. Movie settings, I'll go back. Long exposure noise reduction, I'm gonna turn that off. High ISO noise reduction, I'm gonna leave that at low. I kind of like a little bit of noise in there because if you have it on, the image is a little bit softer. So color space, sRGB, lens compensation, we're gonna leave all that. Media, this is basically just how to set up your SD card. So right now we've got recording media for photo and video in slot 1 and then auto switch media off. But you could set this up to do simultaneous recording. You could do slot 2 for photos and slot 1 for video, whichever you want. If you wanted to do auto switch, you can turn that on so that if slot 1 filled up, it'll switch to slot 2. But I'm just gonna leave it on slot 1 for now. One cool thing about the A7IV that the A7 III doesn't have is that you can actually give your video a file name and it'll consecutively continue on with that file name versus restarting over back to 0001 every single time. And that's one of the annoying things about the older file system, the old menu system. But yeah, if we go in here and we go to file settings and we give it a set file name, you can go in here and delete this. I'm just gonna put A7IV. Okay, And you can see now that's what it's going to be named as a file there. So A7IV and consecutive numbers after that. Everything in here I'm basically done with. Under the exposure settings, I'm not going to really change anything in here. All the stuff is pretty good right out of the bat, except for the dynamic range optimizer. I'm going to turn that off. I never really had any good experience with that, so I'm just going to keep that off. Creative look is just kind of like the baked in different looks you can use. Picture profiles are different from creative looks. So picture profile, we're going to leave that off. I'm going to leave it in standard, but I am going to go -1 on contrast and -1 on shadows. When it comes to autofocus, I set my tracking sensitivity to 4 and leave everything else exactly the same. I'm going to set the level to high and the peak and color to red. So I've gone through basically all the main initial first setup. Now I want to get into customizing the buttons. So I wrote down a list here on the phone, just going over some of the settings that I have on my A7S III, which will kind of carry over to the same settings I would want on this camera. So we're going to go to the yellow toolbox here, and we're going to go to Operation Customize, and then we see Custom Key for Photo and Custom Key for Video. We're going to deal with Custom Key for Photo right now. So our first option is AEL Hold. I'm not going to touch that. AF On, I always set that to my eye autofocus, so I can trigger my eye autofocus anytime I want from the back button. I just have always worked that way, and I like that the best. And we're going to go to eye and face autofocus, and we're going to go to eye AF. And then this will trigger the eye autofocus on and off. So custom button 3, which is C1 on here, it's saying 3 there. I don't know why it doesn't say C1, but that's set to white balance. That's where I typically have it. 4, which is on the far end, which is C3 on the camera, which I don't know why it says 4. That's set to focus mode, which is just the focus mode you're going to be using. And then number 5 is the trash can, so C4. I actually set that to Super 35 mode because I like to be able to toggle between full frame and Super 35 right on the fly without having to go into the menu, and it's super quick. So I'm going to select that and go up to the camera here and over to APS-C Super 35. And then now I can toggle between full frame and Super 35 super fast. Now after that, we've got the joystick, which is always the joystick, but it's also a button if you click it in. And I've set that to manual focus, to toggle between autofocus and manual focus, because some lenses, like this Zeiss 55mm, doesn't have an autofocus switch on the side, and sometimes I need to go to manual focus. So we're going to set that to manual focus select toggle. And now when I click down the joystick, it'll go to autofocus or manual focus, so it's pretty nice to have. The center button I actually set to focus magnifier, so when I am in manual focus, I can actually punch in on what I'm focusing on, nail that focus, and then punch back out. So I'm going to select that, and I'm going to go over to the purple selection here, and it's focus magnifier. Drive mode, that's already printed right on the camera, and then ISO is on the other side, that's also printed right on the camera. And then number 5 is not set. Might figure out something for that later. So I'm going to go over to the top settings here. So obviously we've got our record button, which is red. I'm going to leave that. And then number 2, which is C2, I'm going to leave that. Then we got focus hold on the lens. So if you have a lens with a focus hold button, you can set that to anything. You can set that to IAF on, you could set it to something else, but I'm just going to leave it at that for now. And then the next option we have is our dials. So our top 2 dials here, front dial as well. So the front dial right now is set to aperture, and the back one is set to shutter speed. And then right now the unlabeled dial, which is actually a lockable dial, has always been exposure compensation, but you could now program it to anything you want. So they left it blank. They don't have anything written on it. You can set it to your aperture, your ISO, whatever you want. I'm going to leave it as exposure compensation because that's just what I'm used to. And then the rear control wheel is not set. I'm an OG Canon user, so I'm going to set this to aperture. Because on all Canon cameras, the wheel is actually the aperture. So I'm going to have the aperture back here, even though I'm going to have it up top as well. But that's just what I'm used to, and all my Sony cameras have the wheel as the aperture. And that's basically it for customizing the main dials of the camera. So when we go over to the video settings, we can have an entirely different customizable set of settings. I'm going to leave them all because when I switch between photo and video, I don't want my camera to be configured completely different. So I'm going to leave everything the same for video as I have it for photo. So the main thing we need to set up now is the function menu, and that's the little button between the joystick and the wheel, and I use that the most because you actually get 12 settings that you could have in there for photo or for video, and then you don't have to go into the menu at all because all your main things are going to be right there. So I wrote down the list of all the things that I have in here, so let's set this bad boy up. So as you can see right now, the top section is for photos and the bottom section is for video. Right now they've got drive mode, focus area, ISO, exposure compensation, metering mode, the flash settings, your creative look, your white balance, your steady shot, the image quality settings, and record media settings. So one thing I don't notice is they don't have any face detection or eye detection settings in here, which is something I toggle on and off when I'm doing photos. I'm gonna replace media settings because I actually don't need to change that. So I'm gonna go over here to the autofocus section, face detection, and we wanna be able to toggle the face and eye priority. And that's what we're gonna select. I like how that's set up. It's pretty good right out of the gate, other than just adding the face detection. But when we go down to video here, there's a few things we need to change. So first option is record level. Amazing. We need to have the record level. We need to change the audio levels. Focus, yep. Focus area, we need to be able to change that. Picture profile, we need to be able to change that. So going through S-Log, HLG, S-Cinetone, or whatever, we're going to leave that. Got our zebra display, our zebra level display. So that's the amount of zebra levels we want. I might replace that because I don't really need to change that too often. We got our focus peaking, so being able to make those adjustments. Peaking level, I might also replace that because I'm pretty happy with it just set to high. White balance options, our steady shot options, so going between steady shot and active stabilization, being able to turn that on and off from the function menu is awesome. Focus mapping, that's the new kind of like false color, weird focus thing they added to this camera. I showed it off in my review. If you want to see that, I'm obviously going to link my review to this camera in the description. And then obviously our face detection. So the one thing I do want to add to the function menu in here is lens breathing compensation. That's one new feature that's amazing on this camera. So I'm going to replace that. So I'm going to go over here. It should be up here actually. Image quality, and then go down. Breathing compensation. So breathing compensation is in there now. Picture profile is good. Oh, one thing I forgot to add for photo is silent shooting mode, because sometimes I need to go between silent shooting and mechanical shutter. So that's something I'm actually going to add in here. And I'm going to add that over top of exposure compensation because I already have the dial. I don't need that. And then silent mode. So now I can toggle between the electronic shutter in silent mode and mechanical shutter. Most of these things are the things I access all the time when I'm shooting with this camera, and I don't need to go into the menu. These are all things that can leave me out of the menu. There's only two things that you can't add to this that you do need to go to the menu for, and that's the HDMI settings as well as formatting the SD card. So I'm going to add that to my menu, which will be right at the very top of the menu. So you can see this gray star here, my menu setting. We're going to add an item, and I'm going to go down to the yellow toolbox. Actually, it's not in there anymore. It's under media and format. So we're going to add that to my menu. And then as I mentioned, the HDMI settings, because sometimes I need to do like info on or info off, depending on what I'm doing with the camera. So I'm gonna go down here to external output, and we're gonna do output settings. We're gonna add that to the menu as well. And the info display, we're gonna add that as well. And that's it. That's basically all we really need in there. So looking at my notes here, I think we've covered pretty much everything. I didn't talk about the custom modes. So we got 1, 2, 3 different custom modes. You can actually set those up to have all your settings saved in those custom modes. And usually what I do is I set the first mode to 24 frames per second, the second mode to 60 frames per second, and the third mode to 120 frames per second. And I'm going to show you how to set them as independent settings as well. So I'm going to set these up to independent settings. We're going to go down here. We're going to go down to Operation Customize and see where it says different set for still and movie. We're going to click that. You can set different settings for still and image mode and movie mode in the next screen. So I want my aperture to be independent, my shutter speed to be independent, and my ISO to be independent. Exposure compensation, metering mode, white balance can all stay the same. Picture profile I also want to stay independent, and the focus mode will leave. So that's looking pretty good. So now all those different settings will be completely separate between photo and video. So when I'm on photo, I can have my standard picture profile and my settings for that, so maybe a higher shutter speed. And then when I switch to video, it'll bring it back down to like 1/50th of a second for a shutter speed, and maybe S-Log 3 or something like that. Because typically before, if you wanted S-Log 3 and you're shooting video, and then you switch to photo, you're gonna be shooting photos in S-Log 3 as well, which actually messes with the raw files a little bit. You get a little bit less dynamic range. And so that's one thing that's really awesome about this camera. This makes it like a true hybrid camera. It's so fast to switch between photo and video. But if we go into S&Q now, I'm gonna show you how to set that up. I don't have a fast enough card to actually record the higher frame rates and higher bit rates, but I can show you how we can set up like a time-lapse setting. So if we go in here and up to our video options, and we go down to our S&Q settings, say we want a 24 frame per second video, and our S&Q frame rate, let's put it down to 2 frames per second. And our recording setting, we can shoot 422 10-bit. And right now we're in XAVCS HD, but we could also put that to 4K or HS, which is the H.265 setting. So I'm going to put it to that for now. And go back in here and get us the highest bit rate possible. So now that'll be a time lapse of 2 frames per second and a 24 frame per second 4K video, which is awesome because then you can just make quick time lapses right on the fly. But something else I noticed in here, which you don't get without using S&Q, is that you can actually shoot 10-bit 1080p 120 frames per second. And so we put this to HD and we go to 120 frames per second. As you can see here, it's only 8-bit. That's our highest option. But if we go to S&Q and set our frame rate to 120 frames per second, we actually have the option to shoot 10-bit in 1080p at 120 frames per second. Now this is going to give you a 5 times slowed down video file, but it's going to be 10-bit. And I'm pretty sure you don't get audio with that, where you would get audio with the 8-bit file. But that's just something I figured out today that I didn't know I had before when I was doing the review, because I didn't actually look into the S&Q to see if there was 10-bit in there. Having that higher bitrate or color depth is so much better than just having 8-bit, and this is going to actually allow you to shoot this in S-Log3 and have a little bit more room to work with in post. So when it comes to autofocus, I go to the function button here and I can choose my focus area, and I'll usually do spot, small, and then I can move it around with the joystick where I want to focus. So if I want to focus over here or whatever, I mainly use that for photo. And then obviously I have the face detection and stuff like that, so I can access that from the function button. I have auto white balance. I'm actually going to turn that off. I'm going to go down to like a Kelvin. I usually manually lock in my white balance so that it doesn't shift all over the place when I'm recording. It makes it easier to color grade. And obviously you can adjust your active or standard stabilization in here. I'm not going to walk through all the different autofocus settings and why you should use certain things for different things because I already made a video on that. I'll put a link in the description. It's a little bit dated now because it was with the A7IV III and the A6400, but I'll do an updated video with this camera coming soon. Show the face and eye in the frame. I want to actually show that because that'll actually show you when it's focusing on the face or the eye. Anyway, that's going to be it for this video. Hopefully it helped you out on setting up your camera, or at least seeing how I set my camera up and gave you some ideas on how to set up your own camera. It's all personal preference. This camera's so customizable, like every button and switch can be changed. And yeah, thanks for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you dislike this video, hit the thumbs down button. You won't see it, but I will.